Hi, I'm Lori Jones, President and CEO of Avasec Communications and host of StrategyCast. Join me and my guests, innovators, disruptors, and visionaries as we explore bold and brave marketing strategies that help you transform, scale, and grow your brand. Today's guest, Zach Burgeson, CMO of Carbon, just doesn't play in the influencer space. He redefines it by focusing on the unsung heroes of brand advocacy, second advocates. From micro-influencers to community forums, Zach breaks down how to build authentic momentum by tapping into the voices that truly move markets. We'll get things kicked off by unpacking the philosophy behind this approach and why it works so well in a multitude of industries. Before we get there, Zach, welcome to the show.
A competitive edge starts with strategy, and strategy starts with knowing how to develop one. StrategyCast is a leading marketing podcast that serves up strategic insights, trends, and tips to help separate your business from the pack. Tune in weekly as host Lori Jones interviews bold marketing leaders who have priceless wisdom and are willing to share. Each episode explores cutting-edge approaches that have proven instrumental in transforming brands into industry trailblazers.
Thanks, Lori. Pleasure to be here.
I'm so excited to have you on the show. We've got such great intel that you're going to be sharing with our audience today. And this idea of second advocates is something that I'm super interested in. And really, I heard it first through you. Before we get there, though, tell us a little bit about your journey and what led you to Carbon.
Sure. I've been in the marketing space for a couple of decades now and done everything from e-commerce to brand marketing. And really where I found my niche here is trying to build a brand from the ground up and tell the story of Carbon, both from a commerce perspective and from a brand standpoint. So really excited for what we've been doing the last year and tapping into that influencer network to help us build part of that story.
Yeah, I think it's just a really, really cool space to be in and such an incredible approach as a piece of an integrated strategy. And a lot of people are approaching influencer marketing very similarly to the way that we did 10, 15 years ago. So this idea of second advocates, I think, is something really, really cool. Where do you feel most traditional influencer strategies fall short?
Yeah, I think people try a little too hard. They see the value of an influencer. They see how it, contributes to the portfolio of the marketing suite. But really what you have to do is earn your influencers first. And once you've unlocked that, they become some of your biggest fans, some of your biggest advocates, to steal the word there. So that way your business can grow outside of you just telling the narrative. People are starting to share that on their behalf.
Yeah. And this idea of micro influencers or micro advocacy even is a real strategic shift that is happening among the C-suite and a lot of discussions that are happening among CMOs and VPs. What do you think is the cause of that? Why are we going back to or really starting from a micro influencer standpoint instead of some of these larger approaches?
Sure. I think actually at its core, a micro-influencer could be as simple as your customer base. You serve tens of thousands of customers at any given point. And really, if they've had a good experience, they become your advocates to begin with. And as you continue to level up that strategy and look at folks that can reach more of the masses, those advocates, those influencers really start to tell the story a little bit better for you. And, if you think small, or think a little bit, more focused and tighter there, I think it's going to, benefit you in the long run.
And that's what you refer to as second advocates.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. I think it's great. I mean, what was the epiphany for you? I mean, you entered this incredible brand, you've got, we're all charged with top line growth, right?
Sure.
Got this charge and you're really honing in on influencers. What was the light bulb moment or that aha moment where you said we really need to capitalize on these micro and secondary targets?
As cliche as it sounds, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. You can swing for the fences with one, major endorsement and, hopefully win. But, a lot of times it may not yield the results that you want. So, going with a little bit more of a diversified approach really helps unlock and fine tune how you want to present yourself to the market. And it's really easy to manage that roster, when you're looking at it from that degree, and really fine tune and calibrate where you want to go.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the key elements of this is the prioritization of engagement over reach, which I think is really tough, and why so many people are looking at reach as the driver and not engagement. What prompted your shift in your thinking there?
Yeah, I mean, if you take a bullhorn to a crowd of people and just start talking and yelling and all that, there's a low likelihood that you're going to create that one-to-one connection. And engagement to me is the most important thing that you can have, because if you have a best friend that's telling you about a great product or something that you should do, or a restaurant you should go to, you're more likely to listen to that person than listening to a TV ad or somebody kind of talking at you. So to me, engagement is more of that authoritative best friend mentality.
Well, and I think, as you said, engagement is more likely to build trust.
Correct. Yeah.
And it is, and that authenticity, which is so incredibly important. Can you, as a lot of people are working on their planning, paid endorsement, organic reach, and community-driven buzz are all, we want it all.
Mm.
But ultimately, what is the difference between all of that, and how are you prioritizing it for Carbon?
Sure. I still look at it from the whole portfolio as well. There is a time and a place for paid endorsement. There's a time and a place for that organic reach on the community buzz, which is, icing on the cake. If you're doing things right, you get the people to start talking about you. I think it starts from, a place of authenticity. Like you said, it's not, cramming an idea or a product down, into the masses there. It's really starting to showcase the expertise, what you've done with the product, why it's important, how your customer service comes to life, and really give that warm and fuzzy to the community to let them, start to advocate on your behalf. Where we use paid placement, paid endorsement is really just to start telling that message a little bit more aggressively. But, ultimately it comes back to, the relationship that you build with that customer, from the organic side.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they become your zealots, your brand zealots, right? I mean, they're constantly engaged and really looking at how the brand movement is taking place. It's interesting. We have a lot of different brands that we work with that have, high level celebrity endorsements through Hollywood, and a lot of them, and then very subdued endorsements through, general day-to-day Joes in the marketplace. And we've seen them work in many, many different ways, but what's interesting about the difference between the two is the sustainability. And when we talk about PR, we use the example quite often, is PR can create unicorns of attention, right? Like you get a big PR hit and maybe it lasts for 2 weeks and then you're on to the next. And that's not always achievable, which is why an integrated content and PR and communications approach is so important. And I look at celebrity endorsements the same way. They're not going to continually talk about the brand, but they are going to provide you that great unicorn. How are you using the two to really amplify the voice of the brand? Or do you have a great example of what you've done to achieve a good balance between the two?
Yeah, great question. I think there's kind of twofold here, specifically with celebrity and also with kind of major publication. If you kind of think about them as equal behemoths of reach right there, you kind of take the momentum that flash in the pan can provide, and then back it up with your mission statement, your brand statement, your product value. It's like you said, it has to be integrated and very intentional. You can't sustain on large one-time reach, flashes in the pan kind of marketing campaigns. We recently had the privilege of tuning Scott Disick's car, who's on the one of the Kardashian influencers there, and from that, what we wanted to do was provide him our expertise and our service and really let him do what he does really well, which is talk about the product and talk about his projects on his behalf, right? And what we did is we just showed up. We did our best. We provided, excellent service, excellent product, and everything else just kind of fell into place from there. And then when you take that as more of an authoritative voice and say, hey, you know what? You too can have the same, experience from us, whether you're just a first-time tuner or you've been doing this for decades. So really kind of writing on that. And then, we've also been privileged to be in a couple of pretty large-scale publications like Car and Driver, Motor Trend Magazine, and a few others. And, from that earned standpoint, we worked really hard to build, best-in-class modification to our car and let the road test and the critics really, push it to the limits. And not all feedback is positive and negative, but it's all valuable feedback, and how we are, use that to serve our customers down the road is paramount.
And how you amplify it.
Definitely.
One thing that gets lost quite often is, that one article or, that feedback from Car and Driver, the editorial board, whatever it might have been, can turn into a lot of content downstream, and amplifying that, not just, with a single unicorn hit, but downstream for a couple months, or, plugging it back in when it makes sense, when something else may have come up with the product that we looked at during that, is what really can make a big big impact. We all have so much content at our fingertips, and we just don't realize it. And I think that's where, if there's another takeaway from this show today, is do an analysis of all your internal content that you have, whether it be blogs that just showed up as a blog and it wasn't broken down into 10 different pieces of social content. Really analyze what you have in-house so that you can build this ongoing flow of advocacy through a lot of what you already have. Okay, that's my only soapbox for the day. So as we move into, this all sounds great, but you've got to build the network. You've got to find the right advocates in order for all of this to work. And a lot of that happens with anchoring the brand with credibility. When you're vetting potential advocates, what do you look for beyond a simple follower count?
Sure. We touched on engagement. I still, really feel that that's the most important, metric that we look for. But, outside of kind of that hard KPI, you look for that more soft authenticity, angle as well. Does the influencer really have a passion for the product line? Do they know, what the ins and outs of it? Do they talk about it correctly? Do they have, a desire to start to expand their portfolio as well? And when we look at those influencers for fit, we want to make sure that, we provide a good sounding board for them as well, right? We're just as symbiotic, for their success as they are for ours. You can get into things like brand safety, you can get into things like, paid endorsements and all that. But ultimately at the core of it is, are they a champion for the industry and the product? And then how do you kind of fit into that narrative with them?
Yeah, I love that. And I think all too often brands are too tight with what they want the advocate or the influencer to be talking about. And then you lose that authenticity, and then
Definitely.
you lose the trust. But there is a fine line between the two. You want them to come across as still very, very authentic. So how do you ensure that product synergy is right? Like, maybe what tips do you have for our listeners? And do you have an example of why it really does matter?
Sure. I kind of go back to like Costco free sample mentality a little bit, with your
Oh, I
influencers.
survived in college, by the way.
Yes, definitely. That's a Saturday evening dinner for us.
Yeah, exactly.
Outside of just like giving away free product, which is, could be expensive. If the influencer actually is part of your, industry and lifestyle, really giving them a lack of a better term, a test drive with your product, I think is pretty valuable. Not only just because they get to use it and try it out, but you get to explain why it's different, why it's unique, what's the differentiator in the marketplace, what your plans are for the future, and really start to educate them as if they were, just a full-time employee working in the four walls of your business. And I think it starts there, so that way they have a launching pad to start to form their own perspectives, building off of that foundation of the product. As it pertains to the brand safety side of things, you can kind of give them a little bit of a script on these are the do's and the don'ts of the brand. But ultimately, like you had said, if you force it too much, you lose the credibility and the authenticity that comes with a strategy like this.
I think one thing that is tough is we work so hard to build these advocates and micro influencers. And when you engage with one and they start working with you and they're not working out, you've got to have that hard conversation. Do you recall any of those conversations? And it's not just one or two. I think with most brands, this happens quite honestly a lot. And it might even be something that's happened, outside of the work that they're doing for you that really isn't brand, it discredits the brand alignment. But if you could give our audience some insights on how to handle those situations and perhaps one that you've worked through.
Yeah. At first I think
chopping block is what we're getting to. I mean,
exactly.
It is. I mean, I'm like, being very flowering about it, but sometimes things just don't work out.
Right. Yeah. I think, there's honesty and blunt conversation that has its place. And, I think being timely is also pretty important. And then following up with examples of why, right? An influencer's not working out. Either they're doing great stuff, but it's just not, rendering the results that you need. And I think, honesty is the most important thing that you can have, because not only do you want to, move forward from the relationship, you actually don't want to have, a long-term effect of negativity, right? So the influencer might get, upset, or they might, have poor position on the brand and start to inadvertently deter or detract, future customers from you. So I think, from a specific example, the influencers that don't work out for us, right? Here's why it doesn't work out, because either the product line has changed, or our audience has adjusted a little bit, or we're just, going a new direction after a new market audience. And, having that, conversation either through, message or phone or however, your preferred means of communication, is important to have. And it doesn't mean that the partnership can't return. It just means not now.
Yeah. What about an example, conversely, that has worked out really, really well for the brand, and what have you done to amplify that?
One of my favorite influencers that we have, his name is Whistle Motors. He's up in the Bronx, New York. He's a huge car guy. He knows our product in and out. I mean, he knows our product sometimes better than I know our own product, and it's fascinating. And we do partnerships with him. Again, not to force feed, but to also have just a conversation and to really kind of build that car community. And he does a great job of talking about, our tunes, our hard parts, why we exist, all those kinds of things, together. And we found over, I think we've been working together almost a year now. Over that timeline, looking at each other, saying, hey, what are some ideas that we can benefit each other with, right? You have aspirations to grow your follower count in your business, and we have the same. And, we kind of look together to plug each other and just talk cars.
I would imagine a lot of our audience are asking themselves right now, are these paid, or is it truly just you send a product and you ask them to review it? How do you manage that?
Yeah. Nothing is free, right? Whether it's through free product or hard cash, but, sometimes it does take upfront capital, right? You say, hey, listen, I have this crazy idea I want to try. I'm willing to help you out financially a little bit to kind of make this work and try some things out. And over time, the relationship can change and should change. But, I'm a big fan of paying people for the value of the work that they bring to the table and not trying to get stuff for free. And, if it works, great. If not, you've learned something and you can move on.
Yeah, I think that's great. We have at the agency an influencer contract that we provide all of our influencers just to make sure that we're very forthright regarding what is a paid endorsement and what is not. How do you handle those situations? For perhaps some of the people right now that are just dipping their toes in this and may not know or have such a tool available to them?
Yeah, I mean, being upfront with your expectations first is huge, right? And if you're struggling to understand the opportunity out there, I would definitely advise having conversations with other, like-minded partners out in the field. But for us, we too have an influencer contract that we use, and it's more about, here's the types of content that we typically would like to see. How you build the content is part of the magic that they bring to the table, but what we need, right, is like you said, paid endorsements, organic content, testimonials, and all those kinds of things in between. So I would just, my advice to people would just be, start listing out what you see online to begin with, right? You follow these people on your social media on a daily basis, whether it's through your company or someone else, and take note of it. But also, leverage the community. Everybody here is just trying to grow their business.
Is there a right mix between a celebrity endorsement or influencer and the secondary advocates?
I mean, I kind of think of it like more of like the iceberg, analogy. You get those celebrity advocates to give you those, infrequent big hits, those home runs, those grand slams, right? Like, yeah, the unicorn, like you said. But the advocacy network, the 90% of that is sustaining the conversation in perpetuity. And so you really have to lean on that to continue that momentum.
And I think to that point, there's a good use case to have, the right advocacy mix of the micro influencer and celebrity. So you've worked with Scott Disick and pro athletes. How did these deals differ from perhaps the micro influencer work that you're engaged in?
I think the bigger influencer, the celebrities and the athletes, is a little bit more opportunistic, where the advocacy cohort is a little bit more programmatic.
Right.
And I say that because not every athlete or celebrity is readily available for you to talk about your brand, but the advocacy is a little bit more roll up your sleeves, hard work, and find those right fits.
And do you find that, the pro athlete, these, very large influencers, that their handlers are their publicists are reaching out to brands, or is it typically that you're reaching out to them?
I'd say it's a good mix of both. Nothing would bless me more than to get on some of the bigger podcasts with our CEO, Steve Dinan, and me reaching out to those agents or those publicists is part of the gig. But when it comes to the actual nuts and bolts of having the conversation, we do work with a lot of agents and publicists there to kind of handle out the details. What I find really fascinating is sometimes it does become a little bit of a game of telephone, but ultimately the conversation is happening between both endpoints there, and you just have to figure out how to translate between them.
Yeah. Is there like a secret sauce or a specific strategy that you deploy when you want an influencer involved versus a micro or a secondary tier?
I'd say like big product launches typically would warrant that. We really recently released what we call the CB3 signature package, which is an entire bumper to bumper overhaul of the BMW M4, tons and tons of upgrades that go into that. And so it's not just about like, hey, look at this one piece that we've designed to go out there. It's let me find someone that can help tell the whole story about this, this large investment that we've made. Where we go to more of the micro side is more about why this specific upgrade is probably beneficial for your vehicle, right? And have that a little bit more of a, intimate technical conversation versus look at what we just, announced.
Yeah. And I would imagine when you've got those big announcements too, I always look at everything as kind of reach and frequency, right? The unicorn versus sustaining, the little bites after it. And if you've got that big launch with a major influencer, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 celebrities, then that trusted micro crew can really sustain those messages, for, a week or 2 or a month along the way.
Definitely.
I think that, you look at the micro crew as more frequency and, that top line influencer as the reach.
I mean, the great example, I'm sorry to interrupt, but just with Scott's Car and Whistle Motors working in partnership together without even having a formal partnership,
Yeah.
down, right? So, we did his car, got great photography, and then he actually got excited about it on his own accord, reshared it, retweeted it, reposted it, and had his own dialogue about it. Like, wow, look at what these guys did with this specific vehicle. Like, look at this, spoiler, look at the tune that's done and all the things that go behind that. So
What is I mean, you're talking about a lot of exciting things here with some great names. What is one of the most exciting or successful launches you've had utilizing this entire approach?
yeah, I'd say with Carbon specifically, I do like to kind of tie it down to that CB3 package that we did. It's the most recent, but it's the biggest one we've had. Outside of all that earned media that we had with the publications, it gave us something to tell our customer base about and our dealer network about, and saying, here's the art of the possible. And as much content and conversation and business that one thing can drive, it's just been kind of a really good anchoring point for us to kind of go back to.
Yeah, it's exciting. So, I mean, I've been doing this a few decades. You've been doing it a couple decades, and it the excitement of those situations never go away. When you see in our situation, a client's name in lights, as we say, there's just something so rewarding and exciting about it. And to see them excited about it and to see the audience react exactly the way that we planned, and it like all comes together so beautifully. It just that excitement never goes away.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. This is a great industry that we're in. Certainly there's challenges along the way as well. We've talked, about cost and budget. And how do you manage? Do you as you're establishing the budget specifically, for this line item, do how do you budget the difference between soft goods and hard goods that you might be pushing out versus paid?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of look at it as, that brand and performance marketing kind of hybrid there. And the influencer side really kind of plays on both sides, just depending on the type of the season. And, as you kind of ebb and flow throughout, your marketing life cycle, there are times, right, when you need that hard sell, that hard conversion, the Google ad to go in and create the conversion. But the part where we're filling the funnel with the brand marketing and the influencer side of things is so much more important than we really give it credit to. And so when I'm planning out budgets and all, I want to make sure that, not only do I have 20 to 25, 30% of my budget set aside for, traditionally we'd call it top of funnel tactics, but for these ways to kind of tell the brand story that we know that's not going to return for a while, but ultimately it'll, raise the performance marketing side's efficiency that much more when that shopper is in the market for it. I know a lot of, typical e-commerce conversion rates are 2 to 5% at best, and which leaves the other 95% of the market not yet ready to buy, but you still have to have the conversation and the connection with them for when they're ready to pull the trigger.
Yeah, yeah, and it's gotta be ongoing. I mean, the light's gotta be on, 24/7, 365 days a year, and
Definitely.
a lot of people lose sight of the need for that, especially, when awareness is really the goal of everything, right?
Definitely.
If and what we see quite often is that a lot of brands are entering mid-funnel, and they just don't have the awareness that they need, so they need to completely retrench their strategy. And it's interesting point here because with some of the younger, newer brands, these micro strategies and the influencer celebrity strategies can work very, very well top of funnel with awareness. And then as the brand grows and awareness takes over with other channels, they can move more mid funnel. But I think a lot of times brands just don't give it the time needed to establish the awareness needed to make those mid funnel approaches work.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's expensive and it's a long time horizon. And I find that those who get it and invest in it see the reward downstream. But
Uh,
we live in such a quick investor led world sometimes, and so, being able to explain that, only solves half the problem. The results have to come in at some point,
Yeah, time is definitely not on marketers' sides in the mind people making the budgeting decisions. So that's always a tough one, and definitely a topic for another show. What are some of the common pitfalls that you've experienced in managing these outside relationships?
I'd say consistency is probably a big one. A lot of times you start pretty excited. You have sky's the limit kind of content ideas, and you know, creating that long-term sustainability is pretty important, and can go away pretty fast. Like you had said, with the momentum that the unicorn drives, right? The same kind of, challenge exists. And I would also say doing too much at once is also another pitfall. I firmly believe if you start to, you know, only talk about the brand and only talk about the product so much, their subscriber base and their audience, they're gonna, raise some red flags and say, is this one paid off, or are they really doing this the right way? So I like to kind of almost pump the brakes a little bit too, and just say, hey, make it a little bit more casual. The results will come. Don't try and force it.
Well, and conversely, you're pumping the brakes on some things, but your industry has a need for speed.
Yes,
So
definitely.
how are you managing, an industry that historically has a bit of, loose control over making sure that you aren't perceived in a negative light for something someone's done that they just should not have done?
Yeah. And it's always a really tricky question. And I don't think, I always have the answers for that, or we're all kind of finding that together. But,
Every
what's
parent listening feels that way.
exactly right. What's worked for me and what worked for us, again, is just staying really close to that influencer, and finding out, what their angle is, and what they're doing outside of the advocacy for your brand. But I'm fortunate to work in an industry where it is a little bit loose, and is a little bit more edge case, and you can kind of push the envelope a little bit. And I think that amount of say volatility is not the right word, but that amount of gamut there allows a little bit of room to take some risk. If you were in a regulated industry like finance or healthcare, I can imagine that being a little bit more nerve-wracking at night when you're kind of putting your brand in the hands of other people. But for car people and car culture, it's all about what limits can you push, and then once you find that limit, then I think you can back off a little bit.
Well, and what's interesting about what you've just said, I mean, every word of it's interesting, but an adjunct to that is a lot of those more risky approaches can create the unicorn, just as much as a celebrity might take or create, because it's getting so many views. And that's, that risk taking, within the confines of what's acceptable by the brand, can prove to be incredibly beneficial.
Definitely. And I think as long as you're a good steward for what you believe is right as the brand owner, the advocate has a little bit of play. And if they do go a little too far, or they do overstep, as long as you still have a firm set of values as a company, you can always lean back on those and say, you know what, this is consistent or not consistent with what we believe, but we're all human and we're all part of the same experiment.
So for our listeners today who may not have a great process in place, or they might be doing this for the first time, or it's very ad hoc at this stage, what playbook do you use that might provide some benefit to them, and some quick note-taking on how they might start to build a program out or enhance what they're typically or currently doing?
Yeah, great question. One of my mentors always told me, think big, but start small. And I think that applies here as well. Find the one account that you think would be a good partner for you. That's not, overly large, right? Not like a, 1 million follower account kind of person, but maybe someone with a couple thousand followers that's really started to build up their brand a little bit, and start there and really take the risk and test the waters of how you want to get into a partnership with that influencer, or even those beyond. outside of, following them and contacting them, really start to look at that kind of like that right-sized roster that you can potentially get with. And then as you start to level up the influencer game, you'll start to have those partners be your advocates, right? For you to expand your business and you to start getting in more accounts as well.
Wow. One thing that we're always going to get from a question standpoint is, what is the ROI on this stuff? And we're getting smarter when it comes to attribution with engagement and impressions, and the impact that it might have immediately on web traffic or purchase or areas like that. But how are you measuring ROI?
Yeah, kind of what we mentioned too is it's a little bit of a longer tail conversion game.
Yeah.
Ultimately, we want to stay in business and make more, sales and more transactions. But if you zoom out a little bit and just look at it from the long game, I think it takes the pressure off a little bit. What I found personally outside of looking at web traffic and conversions are, one, are there, geographic hotspots that have changed with, pre and post kind of analysis there from the partnerships that you're doing with these influencers in their specific areas. And, using the Whistle Motors example again, right? We've seen a big growth in customers from the New York area that we had not just typically seen before. So we know that reach is happening.
Yeah.
But I think lastly, like, the non-sales KPIs like NPS and brand safety and, those brand health metrics, right? Do people have a more or less, positive view of your brand after you've done these partnerships? And that's ultimately what you're trying to solve with this stuff.
Yeah, I think that is just so important for people to be taking a look at. And you can see a lift, but if overall sentiment is where it needs to be, then you're really achieving much more than what might be measured. I
Definitely.
love that. Any final thoughts for our audience today before we get to our final Better At question?
Yeah, I mean, kind of going back to your budget question, I'm very fortunate to have a great CEO who trusts and really wants to do the right thing. But if you're having trouble finding, the buy-in for the budget, start with a little bit of capital that you can show that direct response conversion with, just a couple of quick wins. And then, if you can find a way to partition, 10 to 15% of your ad spend as kind of a little bit loose, right? So that way you can and take a little bit of risk and open up in those non-revenue driving ad campaigns or influencers or whatever you want to put that towards. I think that'll help you in the long run. It's definitely helped me where that trust aspect comes first, and then you can spend a little bit more.
I think that's great. And that takes incredible leadership to believe that you should have, quite frankly, a part of every line item, some contingency there to test and see what could work and what doesn't. I think those are such incredible insights that just help us amplify in a bigger way this idea of trying to see what could be without being able to quantify it up front, which a lot of media buying does as a part of it.
Yes.
So I think that's great. So at the beginning of this year, we launched this really cool series. It's called Better At, and it's in place to really help marketers sharpen everyday skills that make a big difference. Things like listening, collaborating, prioritizing, or communicating with impact. So these episodes, we know, go way beyond the big picture strategy, and we really want them to be able to focus on small shifts that lead to better outcomes for all of us. What's one thing that you've learned to be better at that's made a measurable difference in how you lead, work, and show up in your day-to-day role?
I firmly believe in being intentional with your decisions, whether they're big or small. And, with that, everyone survives or fails by how they, operate within their team. As marketers, we've grown up with being the individual contributor all the way to the executive leader. And, you may have the skills, but funny enough, as I'm talking to you about influencer marketing, I could not do this without the team under me with the influencer and the social media, the team. And the amount of ideas that I'll come out with, and like, no, that's just not a good idea. I'm like, okay, you're the expert, right? Make sure that we're doing this the right way. And here's the outcome I'm trying to achieve. How are you going to help solve that and tell the story? And I was, really inspired by the book Turn the Ship Around several years ago, and that just dramatically changed how I think about leadership.
I love that. And you're a great leader. I mean, you're allowing those ideas, the free flow of ideas. You're not squashing them, but you're just making sure that they're on brand and on strategy. And quite frankly, I think 9 out of 10, I hate to use this word, bad, because I believe any idea is good,
Sure.
always leads to something, even if it isn't on strategy. Probably a better way of taking a look at it. If it isn't on strategy, it's always going to lead to something else because of those human prompts, the idea generation machine that really help us, get there. I said prompt, and it's prompted one last question for you. How are you using AI in with your marketing team today?
Oh my gosh, I have fallen in love with the AI over the last few years, and what I found is it's a incredibly powerful tool if you know what you need to ask for.
Right.
What's taken weeks of time can be accomplished in a matter of days, and when you kind of use it as more of like a springboard or a stimulant a little bit to kind of get some things going, I think it's a really powerful tool. Like, hey, what are the top 10 campaign ideas based off of XYZ? It'll spit out, a bunch of different prompts that are all kind of lacking a little bit of human emotion, but it gives you a springboard to start to expand on it. And I think it helps us do a lot more things more effectively and more efficiently, which I found a lot of value in.
Yeah, I love that. We're definitely a human first agency backed with an incredible team of AI. Actually have AI agents that we've built onto the team. That's really almost doubled the size of the agency by using that. Zach, this has been such an incredible conversation today. Thank you so much for your insights and your wisdom share. What is the best way for our audience to get in contact with you?
I love LinkedIn, so just go to LinkedIn, look up Zachary Burgeson. There's 2 of us in the United States. I'm the one in Colorado, so let's connect and have a conversation.
Well, I really appreciate you. Thank you so much. And if you'd like to get a hold of me, you can email me, Lori, Lori, at StrategyCast.com. Thank you again, Zachary, for your appearance on StrategyCast.
Thanks.
That's a wrap. Thanks for joining us on today's show. We hope your strategic brains are spinning with new ideas and bold inspiration that will elevate your strategies and marketing know-how.